The lying DNA. What if modern science concluded that the children you personally gave birth to shared absolutely no biological link with you? In 2002, in Washington state, Lydia Fairchild, a woman freshly emerging from a broken marriage, applied for public assistance to raise her children. In accordance with legal procedures, the state required her and her ex-partner to undergo DNA testing to establish biological parentage. The results came back like a brutal slap in the face. Jamie Townsend, the father, was a perfect genetic match with the children. Yet Lydia, the woman who had directly carried and birthed them, possessed an entirely alien genetic code, with zero biological connection to her own kids. Authorities immediately accused her of welfare fraud and suspected her of posing as a mother to illegally claim adopted children. Despite pregnancy photographs, testimonies from relatives, and hospital footprint records of the newborns, the court adamantly dismissed every piece of subjective evidence. To them, the DNA sequence was the absolute, indisputable truth. The nightmare escalated to an absurd level when Lydia entered her third pregnancy. To rule out any suspicion of newborn swapping, the court dispatched an officer to directly monitor her entire labor in the delivery room. The court representative watched firsthand as the infant emerged from Lydia's body and observed medical staff seal the blood samples of both mother and newborn on the spot. Yet 2 weeks later, the DNA test results from those very samples still returned an impossible conclusion. The child she had just delivered was not biologically hers either. The young mother faced the terrifying prospect of losing custody of all her children and serving prison time. Every lawyer at the time refused to take Lydia's case because, in their eyes, challenging a DNA test result was like trying to prove the sun rises in the west. The turning point only arrived when lawyer Alan Tyndall happened to read a medical study on human chimerism, tetragametic chimerism, in the New England Journal of Medicine. With the intervention of medical experts, they expanded the biopsy collection to other tissues across Lydia's body, instead of relying solely on blood or cheek swabs. The jaw-dropping climax occurred when tissue samples taken from her cervix revealed a distinct second DNA lineage, and this hidden DNA line matched her children perfectly. It turned out Lydia was a human chimera, a single body carrying two separate genetic codes, the result of two fraternal twin embryos fusing together in the earliest days inside her mother's womb. Biologically, Lydia was effectively a fusion of herself and a twin sister who was never born. The court immediately dismissed all charges and restored justice to her family. Lydia Fairchild's case exposed a fatal cognitive blind spot of modern society: confirmation bias, tied to a blind faith in technology. We easily fall into the trap of assuming advanced scientific tools are infallible, rendering us ready to discard the obvious reality unfolding right before our eyes. We treat the DNA code as the sole mirror of human identity, forgetting that nature always holds extraordinary exceptions beyond our conventional understanding. Arrogance in our own knowledge can turn the very tools meant to safeguard reason into cruel shackles, ready to tear apart basic human values in the name of objective truth. The stolen identity. What would you do if you woke up one day to discover that the name, birth date, and entire family you had held dear for half your life actually belonged to someone else? It all began in April 1964 at a Chicago hospital when one-day-old baby Paul Fronczak was abducted from his mother's arms by a woman posing as a nurse. The largest manhunt in the city's history ensued, but the kidnapper's trail vanished into thin air. Over a year later, police found an abandoned toddler in a stroller outside a department store in New Jersey. In an era before DNA technology existed, officers compared the shape of the toddler's ears to a newborn photo of baby Paul and declared the two structures to be a match, as unique as a fingerprint. Overwhelmed with joy, the Fronczak couple welcomed the boy home, gave him the name Paul, and filled his childhood with family love. However, as he grew up, nagging doubts about his physical dissimilarity to his parents began to consume Paul's mind. In 2012, he decided to send a sample to a commercial direct-to-consumer genetic testing company to settle his questions once and for all. The results hit him like a bucket of ice water. Paul shared no biological relationship whatsoever with the Fronczaks. The man stood bewildered, realizing he had been living under the identity of a kidnapped baby, while the real Paul was still missing without a trace. Refusing to exist any longer as an anonymous ghost, he enlisted investigative genetic genealogist C.C. Moore to reconstruct his family tree using DNA databases. The painful truth was finally unmasked. His real name was Jack Rosenthal, born in 1963. Tragically, Jack also had a twin sister named Jill. Both had suffered severe abuse and neglect from their biological parents before Jack was abandoned in New Jersey, while Jill vanished into thin air without a trace. In 2019, the case took another dramatic twist when law enforcement officially identified the real Fronczak child, the baby kidnapped decades ago, now a 55-year-old man living anonymously in Michigan. Jack Rosenthal's 50-year tragedy exposes a cruel cognitive blind spot, confirmation bias, born from overwhelming grief. Desperate for closure, the Fronczaks clung to a vague detail like the shape of an ear to soothe their broken hearts. Meanwhile, authorities rushed to close the investigation to create a fake happy ending. That collective self-deception unwittingly robbed a child of his true identity, turning his life into a false script that lasted half a century. The bizarre switch. What if an entire society joined hands to build a sweet lie, simply to fill the painful void of a powerful family's loss? In August 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared without a trace during a family outing near Swayze Lake, Louisiana. An 8-month fruitless search yielded no answers until police discovered a child matching his description, traveling with a wandering handyman, William Walters, in Mississippi. Despite Walters' adamant claims that the child was Charles Bruce Anderson, the son of a poor woman named Julia Anderson, who had entrusted the boy to his care, authorities promptly arrested him for kidnapping. The wealthy and influential Percy and Leslie Dunbar were summoned for identification. Though the couple initially showed hesitant reactions and the child himself did not recognize the parents, the Dunbars later decisively claimed the boy was Bobby and brought him home amid media fanfare. When the impoverished mother, Julia Anderson, arrived to reclaim her son, she was completely powerless due to a lack of money and legal representation to fight the state's judicial system. Walters was thrown into prison. Julia was forced to return home empty-handed, and the boy lived out his entire life, married, and eventually passed away under the name Bobby Dunbar. This seamless charade seemed buried forever alongside everyone involved, until nearly a century later. In 2004, the granddaughter of the man raised as Bobby Dunbar decided to secretly perform DNA testing to clarify her family heritage. The shocking climax shattered a nearly 100-year-old lie. DNA results confirmed that the man who lived his whole life as Bobby Dunbar carried no Dunbar blood whatsoever. The toddler brought home in 1913 was actually Charles Bruce Anderson, the stolen child of the poor mother Julia, while the true fate of the real Bobby Dunbar remained forever shrouded in the dark pages of history. Bruce Anderson's story leaves behind a haunting question: how powerfully can confirmation bias, when fueled by profound grief, manipulate reality? When people are desperate in the face of a cruel loss, they are willing to cling to a sweet illusion, ignoring glaring anomalies just to ease their own pain. In our lives today, how many truths that you firmly believe in are actually scripts written by your own mind just to avoid raw, unvarnished pain? Beneath the cold grave. How would you feel if, after 5 weeks of sitting by a hospital bed, holding a swollen hand and praying for your beloved daughter to recover, you realized that the person lying there was actually a complete stranger? So where did your real daughter go? On April 26, 2006, a van carrying Taylor University students was traveling along an Indiana highway when a semi-truck collided with it head-on. The horrific crash tore the vehicle open, hurling passengers and personal belongings across the pavement. In the chaotic scene resembling a miniature war zone, 5 people died instantly. Police and first responders found a wallet belonging to Laura Van Ryn, right beside a young woman who had been thrown 15 meters, lying in a deep coma with a severely swollen and disfigured face. Immediately, this surviving girl was identified as 22-year-old Laura Van Ryn. The Van Ryn family rushed to the hospital, overwhelmed with hope to see their child alive. But just as they began preparing for Laura's recovery, a tragic mistake silently trapped both families in a heartbreaking scenario no one could have anticipated. For 35 days and nights, the Van Ryn family kept a 24/7 vigil at the bedside. They tended to every wound, rejoicing over every yawn or small movement. However, the severe brain injury had turned the young woman's face into a swollen mass, completely obscuring her true appearance. Because both girls possessed slender builds, blonde hair, and strikingly similar facial features, the Van Ryn family brushed aside unusual signs, convincing themselves that the trauma had simply altered her personality. Meanwhile, back in their hometown of Gaylord, the Cerak family held a closed-casket funeral in tears for their 18-year-old daughter, Whitney Cerak, attended by over 1,400 mourners. The breathless revelation occurred in late May when her breathing tube was removed. The girl on the hospital bed repeatedly mumbled in protest whenever she was called Laura. When the doctor handed her a notepad, her trembling hand carefully scribbled 2 words that stopped everyone's heartbeats: Whitney Cerak. Dental records were immediately cross-checked, pouring a bucket of freezing water over the reality. The survivor in the hospital bed was actually Whitney, while the real Laura had tragically perished at the crash scene and had been resting in a grave under Whitney's name for over a month. This identity mix-up leaves a haunting question for us all. Can you truly trust your eyes when your brain is drowning in desperation? Confirmation bias, combined with intense hope, leads people to fabricate a comforting illusion to hide a brutal reality. Are you certain that what you see every day is objective truth, or is your mind merely crafting the narrative you desperately want to believe? The doppelganger fate. What if you were enjoying a peaceful holiday barbecue with your family, only for police to barge in, handcuff you, and drag you away all because of a single photograph? How could a random picture have the power to instantly transform an innocent man into a dangerous criminal and strip away your entire future? It all began on May 31st, 1999, with a purse snatching in a Walmart parking lot in Roland Park, Kansas. The victim only caught a fleeting glimpse of the assailant, a thin, light-skinned man with dark hair slicked back, leaving behind no forensic evidence or physical clues at the scene. Investigators believed photo lineups were an absolute tool to pinpoint the perpetrator. Consider what happened to Richard Jones, a man with a solid alibi, having spent the entire day hosting a barbecue with his family. In the photo lineup presented by the police to the eyewitnesses, Richard Jones was the only light-skinned man among dark-complexioned individuals. With no other option matching the original description, the fragile memories of the witnesses were completely warped, sending Richard Jones away on a devastating 19-year prison sentence. This tragedy threatened to lock away his life forever behind cold prison walls, until a bizarre coincidence occurred at the Lansing Correctional Facility. Inmates repeatedly mistook Richard Jones for another prisoner named Ricky Amos. When this information reached attorneys at the University of Kansas Project for Innocence, they retrieved Amos's mugshot and were stunned to see that the 2 men looked like identical twins. Beyond sharing a twin-like face, Amos lived near the crime scene and frequented the exact house where co-defendants claimed to have picked up the man named Rick on that fateful day. The nail-biting climax unfolded in a 2017 court hearing when original witnesses were shown photos of the 2 men side by side. Completely shocked, they admitted they could not distinguish who the real robber was. The judge overturned the conviction, restoring freedom to Richard Jones after more than 16 years of wrongful imprisonment. Richard Jones's case exposes a brutal cognitive blind spot: the malleability of human memory when subjected to biased identification procedures. When terror strikes, our brains do not record events like a video camera. Instead, they automatically fill in gaps with misleading suggestions. Most terrifying of all, the unfounded confidence of eyewitnesses, combined with careless investigative procedures, can turn blind justice into a razor-sharp blade, severing nearly 2 decades of an innocent man's life. Swapped identity. How could a total stranger walk straight into your home, embrace your wife, and manage your family's entire estate without a single soul suspecting a thing for 3 whole years? It all began in the mid-16th century, in the tiny village of Ardegot in southern France. Martin Guerre, a young peasant, abruptly walked away from his wife, young son, and family estate, departing without a word of farewell. Years passed, and his presence faded completely into memory. Then, one day, a man claiming to be Martin Guerre unexpectedly returned. Astonishingly, he remembered intimate personal memories, knew every relative by name, and navigated every corner of his old home. His wife, Bertrande, alongside his sisters and the villagers, tearfully welcomed him back. They lived together as husband and wife for 3 years, had another child, and managed the ancestral lands. The tranquil life fractured when the returned Martin became embroiled in fierce property disputes with the family. Tensions peaked sparking suspicions that dragged the entire village into a sensational trial at the Parlement of Toulouse in 1560. In reality, the impostor was Arnaud Dutil, a vagabond possessing an extraordinary memory. By crossing paths with soldiers who had served alongside the real Martin, he had quietly memorized every habit, scar, and childhood detail of his target. Before stepping foot into the village, he lodged at nearby inns for weeks to gather intelligence and piece together local gossip. Utilizing masterclass psychological manipulation, he dropped ambiguous details for the family to fill in the blanks themselves, then fed those very memories back to them in later conversations. At the Toulouse trial, Arnaud delivered a flawless performance, leaving the learned judges nodding in admiration. But just as the scales of justice were about to tip in his favor, a cold, clacking sound echoed from the wooden courtroom doors. A man with a wooden leg walked in, pointing his finger directly at Arnaud to denounce the fraudulent charade. With his battle scars, his wooden leg, and authentic memories that could not be forged, the newcomer caused Bertrand to burst into tears as she recognized her true husband. The illusion collapsed completely. Arnaud Dutil was sentenced to death and hanged right in front of Martin's house. The classic case of Martin Guerre exposes an unsettling cognitive blind spot, expectation bias, and the deep human need to fill emotional voids. In a world before photographs, fingerprints, or biometric records, people saw only what they desperately longed to see. Bertrand and the villagers needed a man to anchor the household, so they unconsciously embraced the perfect script crafted by an imposter. Deception only thrives when it taps directly into the hidden desires of its victims, turning an entire community into supporting actors in a stranger's play. The world is still full of hidden truths and stories that defy belief. If you're ready to uncover more of the most incredible and disturbing mysteries of our history, subscribe to Oddplain. Don't let the next story pass you by. Join us, and let's explore the unknown together. Thank you for watching, and stay curious. Goodbye.